Forget the legends of glorious Viking adventurers, and while we're at it, forget the horned helmets, they never wore them. It's time to forget the romantic image of noble explorers, setting out for new horizons, because the sagas and songs, written by the victors, have a habit of leaving out the darkest truths. They don't tell you the story of the women whose lives were shattered in the wake of the longships. This isn't a story you'll find in any saga. There's no woman named Alara recorded in the annals of the North. Her name is a whisper, a stand-in for the countless women captured from coastal villages, torn from their families, and forced into the brutal reality of Viking servitude. Her story might be imagined, but it's built from the hard evidence of archaeology, the cold text of law codes, and the grim accounts of those who saw this world firsthand. This is the real story of what happened to the women who became the Vikings' most valuable and most disposable prize. Before the dragon prows appeared on the horizon, Elara's world was small, knowable, and her own. Picture a village of timber and wattleland daub, nestled in a cove on the coast of what we now call Ireland or England. The air smelled of salt, peat smoke, and damp earth. Life had a rhythm, dictated by the seasons and the tides. Mending nets with her father, tending a small vegetable plot with her mother, weaving wool into coarse but warm cloth. Community was everything. Life was hard, no doubt. Hunger was a frequent visitor, and the sea was a constant danger. But it was a life of connection. Every face was familiar, every family's history was intertwined with her own. Her future, she would have assumed, was to marry a boy from a neighboring homestead, raise children, and grow old within the comforting embrace of her people. She knew the local priest's prayers, her grandmother's folk tales, and the shape of every rock along the shoreline. This world, in all its simplicity, was a complete universe. It was a world of belonging. The idea of being owned of being someone's property, was as alien as sailing to the edge of the world. A person was defined by their family and their community, not as a commodity to be tallied and traded. To understand the horror of what came next, you have to understand what was stolen. The Vikings didn't just take bodies, they shattered worlds. They ripped people out of the very fabric of their reality. For Elara, and thousands like her, the life she knew was about to be burned to the ground. The longships were coming, and with them, an end to everything. The attack wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. It came without warning, a sudden storm of violence from a calm sea. The first sign was a shout from the cliffs, a cry of alarm that was quickly silenced. Then, the longships, slow and menacing, their carved prows like serpents tasting the air. They moved with terrifying speed, beaching on the shore before the village could mount any real defense. The men who poured from them weren't the noble warriors of myth. They were efficient, ruthless predators. Chaos descended, the air filled with screams and the splintering of wood. Huts were set ablaze. The small wooden church, a place of sanctuary, offered none. It was a prime target, not just for its silver chalices, but for the people huddled inside. Historical records, like the Irish Annals of Ulster, speak of these events with chilling brevity. An entry from the 9th century mentions a raid where a great host of women was carried off. This phrase appears again and again in the chronicles, a grim reminder that this wasn't random cruelty. It was a business model. Raiders weren't just looking for gold, they were hunting for people. For the first time in Scandinavian history, acquiring human chattel became a key driver of the economy. An entire society was being built on the backs of captured people, the thralls, as they were called in Old Norse. Thralls weren't a small part of Viking society. Some scholars estimate they may have made up a significant portion of the population. In certain areas, perhaps as high as a quarter. Amid the carnage, Elara would have been seized, her father, trying to protect his family, cut down, her mother, trying to shield her children, shoved aside. Elara, along with other young women and boys, would have been judged with a cold, practical eye. The old and infirm were often killed outright. The young and able-bodied were the prize. They were rounded up, hands bound, faces streaked with soot and tears. In that instant, she stopped being Elara, a daughter, a member of her community. She became property, an object. As she was dragged toward the ships, the last sight of her home was smoke and death, the familiar shoreline stained with the red tide of the raid. The journey on the long ship was a second death. Forced into the hold with dozens of other captives, Elara was plunged into a world of darkness, fear, and filth. The space was cramped, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, sickness, and despair. Chained or bound, the captives were packed together, tossed about by the relentless motion of the sea. This wasn't just a trip. It was the machinery of a sophisticated and brutal trade network. The Vikings were masters of logistics, not just in war, but in human trafficking. Their roots stretched from the British Isles down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, all the way to the Byzantine Empire and the wealthy markets of the Middle East, and captives were their most important commodity. Archaeology provides the stark, physical proof. In the remains of Viking trade hubs like Birka in Sweden, archaeologists have unearthed iron shackles and collars. These weren't for animals. They were designed for human necks, wrists, and ankles, the cold, hard tools of the trade. For the women in the hold, these chains were a constant, painful reminder of their new status. It's a chilling insight that the Old Norse word for slaves, *fe*, was the same word they used for cattle or wealth. Many didn't survive the journey. Disease spread rapidly. The weak and injured succumbed to exposure or neglect. For the captors, it was a simple calculation of profit and loss. A dead captive was just a failed investment. For Elara, every lurch of the ship was a step further into an unknowable hell. The sea that had once sustained her village was now her prison. She was surrounded by the sounds of weeping, the moans of the sick, and the terrifying silence of those who had given up. The journey's end wouldn't bring relief, only the next stage of her commodification. After weeks at sea, the long ship arrived at a bustling port, a place like Dublin, which the Vikings founded and turned into one of Western Europe's largest slave markets. For Elara, weak and traumatized, it was a terrifying spectacle. A chaos of unfamiliar languages, the smell of foreign spices, and the press of 1,000 bodies. Here, the final act of her dehumanization took place. Captives were paraded before potential buyers, Norse farmers looking for labor, chieftains seeking new concubines, or traders who would transport them even further east. She and the other women would be inspected like livestock, their teeth checked, their limbs examined for strength, their bodies assessed for childbearing potential. A price was haggled and paid. This wasn't just about labor. Rating for women was, for many lower status Viking men, a path to social advancement. In a society where powerful men often took multiple wives and concubines, capturing a woman was a way to establish their own household. The genetic story of Iceland offers silent testimony to this reality. Modern analysis of the Icelandic population reveals a stark gender bias pattern. While the paternal lineage is overwhelmingly Norse, some studies show the maternal lineage is as high as 62% Gaelic from Ireland and Scotland. The founding population of Iceland was built, in large part, from Norse men and Celtic women. While some of these unions may have been voluntary, the sheer scale of the imbalance strongly suggests a massive number of women were taken to Iceland against their will. Elara would have watched as the last familiar faces from her old life were sold off one by one, disappearing into the crowd with their new masters. Eventually, her turn would come. A hand would point, silver would be exchanged, and her leash passed to a new owner. She was now officially a thrall. She belonged to someone. The journey was over, but her ordeal had just begun. Elara's new home was a Viking longhouse, a long, smoky hall, crowded with people and animals. Her life was now defined by endless, grueling labor. Thralls performed the heaviest and most unpleasant tasks, grinding grain with a heavy handquern, hauling water, spreading manure, herding livestock, digging peat for fuel. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after dark, an existence reduced to work and exhaustion. She lived at the bottom of a strict social ladder. Archaeologists believe thralls often slept in the coldest part of the longhouse. Sometimes near the animals, their diet was meager. Skeletal analysis from Viking burial sites consistently shows that individuals identified as thralls had diets poor and high-value foods like meat, while their masters ate much better status written into their very bones. But the physical hardship was only part of it. As a female thrall, she was subject to constant sexual exploitation. Her body was not her own. It belonged to her master. The Arab diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who met Vikings on the Volga River in 922, wrote with shock of witnessing a trader have sex with an enslaved girl in public, treating it as his right of ownership for all to see. This wasn't a secret shame. It was an accepted and codified right of an owner. The sagas are filled with references to powerful men taking enslaved women as concubines. Or Frillier asterisk. But what happened when a captive woman became pregnant with her master's child? The answer was cruel. The fate of the child was entirely up to the master. According to Norse law, a child born to an enslaved woman was born a slave, regardless of the father. The father could choose to acknowledge the child and grant them freedom, but he had no obligation to. More often, the child simply became another piece of property. The mother had to watch her own child grow up a slave in the same household, a living reminder of her own powerlessness. Survival wasn't a victory. It was a prolonged sentence. The stories of these women have been buried by time and myth. Their experiences, etched into bone and coded into our DNA, have been largely ignored. If you believe these forgotten histories need to be told, subscribe and help us continue to uncover the truth. The power a master held over a thrall was near absolute, and this wasn't just custom. It was enshrined in law. Viking society operated under legal codes enforced at assemblies called the asterisk thing asterisk. But for a thrall, these laws offered virtually no protection. In the eyes of the law, a slave wasn't a person. They could own nothing, inherit nothing, and their testimony meant nothing. If a free person killed someone else's slave, the penalty wasn't for murder. They simply had to pay the owner of the thrall's replacement value, as if they killed a cow. An owner could beat or even kill their own slave without any legal consequence. This created a constant state of fear. The threat of violence was a daily reality. But what about resistance? Archaeological digs across Scandinavia have revealed what are known as double graves. Often, one body shows clear signs of execution like decapitation and is placed in a subordinate or humiliating position at a site in Flakstad, Norway. Decapitated bodies buried with their masters were identified as thralls through their diet, while scholars still debate the prevalence of ritual human sacrifice. These graves suggest some thralls were killed to serve their masters in the afterlife. The diplomat Ibn Fadlan even described a chilling ritual where an enslaved girl is coerced into being sacrificed and buried with her dead chieftain. The message was clear. A thrall's life had value only in its utility to her master. Any act of defiance could result in a brutal, final punishment. She was trapped not only by the walls of the longhouse, but by a legal system that explicitly denied her humanity. The law wasn't her shield. It was the architecture of her cage. What was the ultimate fate for the thousands of women captured by the Vikings? For most, their stories end in anonymity. But occasionally, archaeology offers a glimpse into a terrifying possibility. One such window is the mass grave at Repton, England. Repton is where the Viking Great Army wintered. In 873 CE excavations there uncovered a burial mound containing the bones of at least 264 people, all dating to that exact period. Over 80% were male, many with battle injuries, but about 20% were female. This has raised chilling questions. Who were these women? Isotope analysis suggests some were Scandinavian, while others were likely local Anglo-Saxons. Were they wives, camp followers, or thralls? The interpretation is heavily debated. Many scholars believe they were casualties of a disease that swept through the camp. But the scale of the burial and the fact that the bones were moved there after death has led to a darker theory. Could this have been a site of mass execution? As the Vikings' fortunes in England turned, is it possible they systematically eliminated captives who knew the inner workings of their operations? We can't know for sure. The bones don't tell us their cause of death, but the Repton grave is a haunting monument to the violence of the era. It forces us to confront the possibility that for some captive women, servitude didn't end with old age or freedom, but in a shallow, unmarked grave, their stories deliberately erased. It would be wrong to cast these women only as passive victims. To survive in such a system required immense resilience, and within the darkness, there were glimmers of defiance. Resistance could be an act of sabotage, a tool intentionally broken, or the quiet preservation of one's own language and beliefs. But the archaeological record has also challenged the old idea that Viking society was run exclusively by men. In fact, some freeborn Norse women wielded immense authority. They could own property, inherit land, and initiate divorce. More shockingly, archaeologists have found female graves containing the ultimate symbols of Viking power, weapons. At the famous trading hub of Birka, a high-status grave, long assumed to be a male warrior, was confirmed through DNA to be a woman. She was buried with a sword, an axe, a spear, and the shield's the full kit of a military commander. And this isn't an isolated case, however, and this is a big however. These warrior women were exceptional. They were the elite. The woman buried at Birka and a captive like Alara grinding grain in a longhouse represent the extreme poles of female experience. One held the power of life and death, while the other was legally considered no more than property. The existence of these powerful women just paints a more complex picture. It shows that Viking society wasn't a monolith. Status and origin determined everything. While one woman could lead an army, another, captured from a foreign shore, could be chained and sold. For a thrall like Alara, was there any hope of escape? The idea of freedom existed, but it was a distant shore. Open escape was nearly impossible for someone in a foreign land with no resources. The most common path was manumission being freed by one's owner. This could happen as a reward for a lifetime of loyal service. In rare cases, a thrall allowed to sell goods might, over decades, save enough to buy their own freedom. A concubine who bore her master's sons might also be freed, but this was the exception, not the rule. But even this freedom wasn't true liberty. Freed slaves, known as *Lasinger*, occupied a gray zone. They were no longer property, but they weren't equal to the freeborn. They remained legally bound to their former master, who now acted as their patron. They often needed his permission to move and owed him continued support. Real freedom wasn't for you. It was for your children or grandchildren, maybe. The stain of slavery lingered for generations. So, what might Alara's future have held? Perhaps, after years of servitude, an aging master granted her a half-freedom. Perhaps she had children who would be born into that same gray zone. Or perhaps, like so many others, she would simply die in bondage, her name and story lost to the soil of a foreign land. The story of Alara, and the countless real women she represents, is a brutal counter-narrative to the Viking myth. It forces us to look past the long ships and into the dark heart of an economy that ran on human trafficking. Capturing slaves, especially women, wasn't just a byproduct of their raids. It was a central pillar of their culture and economy. From the violent moment of capture to a lifetime of forced labor and sexual exploitation, the experience of a captive woman was one of systematic dehumanization. Their bodies were commodified. Their children were born into bondage, and their legal status was reduced to that of livestock. And while we now know that some Norse women could be powerful leaders, that truth only throws the plight of the enslaved into sharper relief. Alara's name isn't written on any runestone. Her voice was silenced over 1,000 years ago. But her story, pieced together from the cold, hard evidence, is a vital reminder. History isn't just written by the victors in their epic poems. It's also carved into the bones of the forgotten and inscribed in the DNA of their descendants. And it's our duty to listen to their silence. If you found this journey into the darker side of history compelling, please subscribe and join the conversation. What part of this story shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.